Our school committee meetings are also live streamed on ActonTV's YouTube channel, although public participation is not possible with that option. The links and phone number are found on the posted agenda on the abschools.org calendar. This meeting is also being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. Per our remote policy, all votes will be done by roll call, but I do just want to note that most members are in the auditorium tonight where we meet. So there seemed to be some confusion about whether or not we meet live. We are meeting in person, although Yevon Wang, Kira Cook, and Adam Klein, are participating via Zoom. And we are maintaining the Zoom link so that we are adhering by all of the gathering policies and making sure that there aren't too many people in the auditorium so that we can stay appropriately distanced. So this allows the 115 people who are attending our meeting to actually attend, as they would not be able to if we were all in the auditorium. So if members of the public want to ask questions, I'm going to ask them to use the hand raise feature to participate in the meeting and not to use the chat. According to our policy, BEDH, members of the public may speak for up to 3 minutes on items that are not included on this agenda. I imagine that most of the people who are attending tonight have thoughts that they want to share with regards to what is on the agenda tonight. So the way that that's going to work is I'm going to entertain a conversation with the school committee, and I'm going to give the school committee appropriate chance to answer questions and ask questions and have responses with each other. So I'm not ignoring hands that may be raised among the public, but I just want it to be clear that I'm going to have the conversation with the school committee first, and then we will entertain public comment. I also just wanted to remind everybody to be kind to each other. This is a very hard meeting to have. There has been a lot of discussion on social media for the last 3 weeks, and it definitely ramped up today. I want to remind everyone listening that everyone at this table, at these tables, is a parent. Everyone at these tables has their own feelings about everything, and just like those who are in the public, we all have feelings about this, and we are all people, and we've all taken all of this stuff into consideration, and this is a hard conversation for everybody, so please just be kind. If there is anyone that wants to speak to something that is not on the agenda tonight, now would be the appropriate place. It looks like there's one person who has their hand raised.
Ben, you can talk now if you have something that is not on the agenda.
No, it's actually regarding what's on the agenda, so please go back and mute.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so item 4.1 on our agenda is the approval of the Acton Boxborough Regional School Committee meeting minutes of July 30th. That was our workshop, so just the minutes from the public part of that meeting. The minutes of July 23rd will be done at the next meeting. Have members had enough time to read them? Yes? Okay, so if so, then I will take a motion to approve them.
Move to approve the minutes from the
July 30th.
Thank you, July 30th meeting.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Then we'll do a roll call. Diane?
Yes.
Amy? Yes. Angie?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Me? Yes. Kira?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Yevon?
Yes.
All right, those are approved unanimously, Beth. I'd also like to note that some members are wearing clear masks tonight. Thank you, Don Bentley, for providing them to us. These are masks that were ordered for the whole district, and I thought it might be fun for people to see what some of our teachers may be using or wearing to do some of their instruction. It might help us to be able to see each other's mouths, and that was one of the big complaints from our workshop, was that it was hard to see how people were feeling with masks on. So there is one for everybody if you want to try it, and if you want to just try it at home, then that's fine too. All right, so With that, I will hand it over to Peter.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to pull up presentation. All right, so good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another school committee meeting that we have. I know you're not used to meeting this often during the summer, but I very much appreciate all of the time that you're putting into this. We're here tonight to just present you a very brief overview of the final transition to school plan. As you know, the plan has been on our website for some time, but we also posted this as a single document and then sent that to you over the weekend. That has also been posted for our families as well. And I sent an additional cover memo with some updated information as well that you have access to. And the focus of the presentation tonight, knowing that you have already viewed much of this, is just to reiterate some of the major highlights of the previous presentation I gave and update you around some public health data to make sure that you have the most relevant recent information. So I just want to thank all of our working groups who worked toward developing this plan. As you know, the working groups were kind of the overarching groups that had been working over the last 2.5 months to develop the transition to school plan. However, several of these working groups also had multiple subgroups of educators across the district that fed into the final version of the plan that we've been presenting. Just to go over some of our guiding principles, health and safety were our top priorities. We wanted to keep all of our plans realistic for our stakeholders, including our students, families, staff, and community. We want to create warm and welcoming environments in our schools that prioritize connections with and among students and staff. We want to support our students' social emotional well-being. Equity will remain at the core of our work for our students. Our focus is on students as learners and individuals, not just about the unfinished teaching and learning. And then communication is critical to maintaining trust. I want to talk about just acknowledging risk and balancing risk for a brief minute. So last meeting, I referenced something called the Parabola Project, which was a collaboration between Ariadne Labs and the Learning Accelerator. Ariadne Labs is a partnership of Brigham and Women's Hospital and the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And the Massachusetts State Superintendents Association has partnered with this organization on something called the Parabola Project, taking a look at the best safety practices as intended to supplement DESE's guidance that we received from the state. One of the slides that I thought was particularly important out of this Parabola Project was understanding a balanced view of risk. There's absolutely no doubt to any of us that the central risk that we all have to contend with right now is the risk of COVID-19, the risk of transmission, and then the health impacts that can have, not only on our students, but on our educators as well, as we think about our return to school. I think even understanding that that has to absolutely be the primary risk we think about, we also have to acknowledge that there are other risks to our students as well. And those include a loss of learning, food insecurity, social emotional impact of not being in school, loss of parental employment, and then the impact that that can have on our students, reduced detection of child abuse, and lack of essential services. We know that schools are a primary conduit to connect students with essential services outside of just the schools. And so I think as we think about making decisions about returning, and I know as our team thought hard about what we would recommend to you tonight, we really wanted to make sure that we were taking into account the risks of COVID-19, but also thinking broadly about what are all of the impacts that we have on students that we need to be thinking about as we make an important decision. Current public health information, and this is the same format that you saw, but I've updated the information based on yesterday's and today's statistics. I also added one slide because I think it's important that we all have a shared understanding of what type of information we consider most relevant to our decision making here as a district. The information about our own schools and district here at Acton Boxborough are absolutely the most critical, relevant information that we can take into account. If we were to have a COVID case in our schools, that would be the most important information that we would contend with, and we would react appropriately. If we then work our way through the range of data available to us, next in line in terms of relevance would be information about our community and the spread of COVID in the community. And then we look at the county, Middlesex County, and the regions around Middlesex County, because we know we also border several other counties. We can look at information at the state level and then at the national level as well. As we move from kind of the closest proximity to our own communities, the information gradually becomes less relevant. It doesn't mean that we don't have to pay attention to what's going on in Georgia or Texas or Florida. We certainly need to pay attention because we know that we do have people in our community who travel. The virus can spread from person to person, but it's not the immediacy of the data that we're seeing around Acton and Boxborough. So I just wanted to start with that. A couple of charts for you, and this is covidactnow.org, which is a great resource if you are trying to follow daily trends in COVID statistics. Massachusetts, daily new cases per 100,000 people of population. You can see it's trending upwards, but that rate is still considered to be favorable. I've been watching some of the information that's out, and I know Massachusetts, you will hear recently imposed additional travel restrictions, for example, in Rhode Island. And I believe the key metric there was this number had actually gone over 10 as a concern for wider spread of the virus. We have to watch this as we progress, but we also need to look at infection rates, and we can see we have climbed out of the low range into the moderate range or medium range, and the positive test rate generally remains favorable at 3%. If you look at the map of Massachusetts, you can see that a number of different counties have elevated risk levels, including Middlesex County. I will say I looked at all of the data on the counties around us in preparation of the memo yesterday, and Middlesex County actually has the most favorable numbers relative to all of the counties in the region. The most relevant data that we have available right now is on our local cases. And in Acton, we have 4 cases. And in Boxborough, we are actually going on several weeks of 0 cases. And that is, as of yesterday, talking to the health directors and town managers in each town. At the county level, daily new case rate per 100,000 residents is 5.3. The infection rate is 1.12. If you have been following that closely, that will mean something. If not, you can actually go on that covidactnow.org website and get detailed information about what that means. It's interesting to note that positive test rate data is not reported at the county level, so we just don't have access to that information. So what does this mean for us? In essence, what it means is the local data in Acton and Boxborough is favorable. If we did not open our schools now, it would be hard to imagine any scenario that had more favorable local data. It would be very hard for any community to get to 0 cases for a prolonged period of time. Middlesex County data is more favorable than our surrounding communities, but certainly bears watching. Massachusetts data still remains generally favorable, but it is increasing in its incidence of COVID-19, and that is absolutely something we need to watch as we come up on the start of the school year. And then national data is absolutely concerning, but it is not as immediately relevant to our situation here in Acton and Boxborough. So we're going to continue to monitor data every day. We've been doing that for several weeks now. We may need to make adjustments to starting plans, so we're going to ask you to take a vote on an approved plan tonight. However, we do so with the understanding that we may need to adjust that based on what we see with public health data as we approach the start of the school year. Just some general safety precautions, and you can see far more on the website and in the final plan that we sent you. But just to highlight a few, because we are talking about these a lot now, we have the 3 for you and me, which are the 3 critical safety practices, which research really has congealed around, is proven effective at mitigating risk of transmission of the virus. 1 is to wear a mask and to make sure that it covers your nose and mouth. 2, washing hands frequently. And then 3 is using distancing. You will recall the DESI guidelines set a minimum distance of 3 feet, but you could aspire to 6 feet. The CDC continued to recommend 6 feet, as do many other organizations, including the Parabola Project. We decided to go with 6 feet of minimum distance. So just as a reminder, we are requiring all of our students, preschool through grade 12, to wear masks. All our faculty and staff are required to wear masks. Students need to bring 2 masks with them on a daily basis, and they can be reusable or disposable. Masks will be available in every school should a student forget their mask. Each school schedule will provide an opportunity for multiple mask breaks throughout the day. And these will occur with students 6 feet apart, ideally when students are outdoors. Hand washing and hygiene. Students will be required to wash or sanitize their hands upon arrival to school, before eating, before putting on or taking off masks, and prior to dismissal. Each school will have hand washing and sanitizing stations and visuals throughout the schools to remind students and staff of proper hygiene. And in terms of distancing, our goal is to maintain 6 feet, which is what we have planned all of our classrooms for, is that 6 feet of distance whenever possible. 3 feet is the minimum distance allowed between people per the DESI regs. We are not following that. We are going with 6 feet. During mask breaks, 6 feet of distance minimum is absolutely required. So anytime students are eating or they're taking a mask break, we need at least 6 feet, if not more, distance between them. And all of our desks will be arranged in our classrooms to provide for that level of distancing. And then alternative spaces in each school, we're actually looking at all of those spaces and looking at repurposing them should we need larger spaces to be able to make sure students can be spread out throughout the day. So our recommended plan, and I'll apologize because much of this you saw, but I know we have a big audience tonight and I thought it worthwhile to just go over some of the highlights of this. So we are offering 2 programs that students may opt into. One is an in-person program and the other is a remote learning program. The in-person program I'm going to get into a little because it follows a continuum. And then the remote learning program is for students who do not want any in-person learning this year and instead are choosing to be fully remote. If you remember in July, I came to you with data and we had done some surveys in early July, and overall the estimate was that 80% of students would want an in-person program based on those survey results, and 20% of students would want the fully remote program based on survey results. Since that time, and since we did the draft plan a couple of weeks ago with you, we did send out the enrollment link to all of our families, and we are reporting very high levels of enrollment. We're upwards of 97% overall in the district, so that's going very, very well. And I wanted to share some of that data with you. As I indicated before, we estimated that it would be 80% of students in July. We are now at 76% of students want in person, and 24% want a remote learning program. And that is the data effective last night. Breakdown, I highlighted levels for you, but I provided the school information for those of you who are interested in taking a look by school. But overall, what we're seeing at the high school is it's around 14, almost 15% of students want the fully remote program, so about 85% are really looking to be in person next year at the high school. At the junior high school, it's about 23% remote, so obviously the opposite in terms of in person. And then at the elementary level, it was about 30% remote. It does vary significantly by school, with one of the lowest schools at about 20%, 21%, and the highest at around 45%. So that is certainly something we needed to consider, and it did cause us to make some adjustments in how we planned, and I'll talk about staffing a little bit with you. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the in-person program first. As I mentioned before, the in-person program will happen along a continuum of learning modes. Right now, we do believe and are recommending that conditions are favorable, that we can bring our students in some form in person, but we need to take enough precautions to keep them distanced. And so that led us to believe that the hybrid mode would be the most effective learning mode to be able to start the school year. That was the one mode that allowed us to get to 6 feet of distance instead of just 3 feet, which would happen if we brought all of our students in. If conditions warranted and became very favorable, for example, one easy one would be we have a vaccine. And, another one could be, maybe there's a bit of magic that goes on in the world and COVID-19 disappears completely and there are no cases in our region for a prolonged period of time, that would certainly also cause us to think about how we could open up and become more in person. Conversely, though, we could see continued deterioration of public health data, and we would make a decision to become fully remote at that point. So again, the continuum of learning modes that we could be in for an in-person learning program is that we could be fully in person, we could begin hybrid, which is recommended, or we could have to go into fully remote. So there are 3 options for the in-person program. The schedule for the hybrid program that we proposed, we studied several different schedules, or considered several different schedules. We decided to recommend blue and gold cohorts. And essentially what we do, blue cohort would be in person with us on Mondays and Thursdays, and the gold cohort would be in person with us on Tuesdays and Fridays. These are K through 12 cohorts because we wanted to prioritize families being able to stay together within the cohort. We also are planning to divide students alphabetically. The high school looked at a few different options of how they might want to divide students, but because of the complexity of their schedule, they really needed to look at an alphabetical split, and they needed to figure out, based on the balance of individual sections, what the specific alphabetical split would be. So we're currently operating off of LI would be the first cohort or blue cohort, and then so A through LI is blue, and then LO through the end of the alphabet would be the gold cohort. That could shift slightly as the high school finishes its schedule, but we expect that to happen over the next week or two so we can tell parents which cohort they're in. Once the high school determines its final cohorts, the junior high school will be following that model and the elementaries will as well. However, we do know that elementary principals in particular may need to shift some students between cohorts in order to provide appropriate balance between the cohorts based on a variety of demographic data. We do not want it, for example, a class that has, one cohort of 11 boys and 1 girl. That would just not be an appropriate cohort. So we do want to give elementary principals some flexibility in doing that. Unfortunately, based on the complexity and the timeline with which we have to create this schedule, we're not able to take requests from families for one cohort or another. We unfortunately just don't have the time, and time is one of our biggest enemies right now. Wednesdays in the hybrid model would be a fully remote day in the morning of synchronous learning, with anticipated some asynchronous work in the afternoon to round out the day for students. And in the afternoons on Wednesdays, if you recall, at the elementary level, we've long had half-day Thursdays for additional teacher meetings, professional learning time in the afternoons. That would actually shift to Wednesdays, and that allows us to break up the days evenly over the course of the week. One thing that I think is significant here, the reason we chose this is this model specifically was chosen because it makes sure that kids don't miss more than one day in a row without seeing their teacher, either live or online. Whereas we looked at a potential like a Monday, Tuesday cohort and then a Thursday, Friday cohort. And one of the deficiencies we found in that is that there were 5 not asynchronous days in a row. So if you were in Monday, Tuesday, that meant you were off Wednesday through Sunday, which we thought was really, a lot of time where students might regress academically and socially and emotionally. And similarly, in a week-on, week-off model, so you attend school one week, you're at home the next, it actually jumps up to 9 days where you would not have contact with your teachers. So that really became a hindrance. So that's why we decided on this model. Everything is a compromise, but we know from our cleaning procedures, we don't have any different cleaning procedures that happen on any day of this week that don't happen every day. So in other words, every night our custodians go in with a disinfecting mister, and they will disinfect all of our rooms, classrooms, offices, sanitize surfaces, and that happens every night as opposed to in some districts where it's just once a week or twice a week. So I just want to highlight that, and that's one of the reasons we felt comfortable with this model of alternating days. I did go through this already, so I'm not going to spend time on that. I did want to give you some updates, so I did kind of a strike-through version of this. This was kind of the overall staffing plan for how we would look at the cohorts. If you recall last time, We came and we said we were going to group our students at the elementary level on a district-wide basis because we needed to pool enough elementary students at any grade level across the district to create appropriate cohorts. And we were staffing that with classroom teachers and district curriculum coordinators and coaches. Because we saw the greatest shift in elementary enrollment, you know, at those 6 schools, which was really almost a 10% shift, we actually now looked back at the staffing model and have determined to just, instead of staffing it with our district curriculum coordinators, we are staffing that solely with classroom teachers. That allows our curriculum coordinators to actually support both the in-person and remote learning programs more effectively because they don't have classes full of students. But in addition, it allows more educators who were hoping for a remote option to be able to take advantage of that option. So it was kind of a win-win in a couple of different ways. We are anticipating that will be 30 classroom teachers. That's the number we're working with right now, plus special educators. And we're working through individual student IEPs to determine how many special educators we need to assign, and we should have that done over the next week. Teachers in this would work fully remotely. Our curriculum and specialists and coaches will continue to support instruction for both the in-person and remote learning models. This is also an advantage for us, not having our curriculum coordinators in classrooms should the entire district have to go fully remote at some point, because then they would be available to support all teachers. We do anticipate, based on enrollments, that there are very few teaching positions that actually need to be replaced in this model, from shifting teachers from in-person into this remote learning program. And that's simply because the teachers and the students go in parallel. And that percentage actually worked out pretty well, and that allows us to plan class sizes in the remote program for about 24 to 26 students. And from a duration standpoint, one of the greatest pieces of feedback we got from families was that having to make a full 1-year commitment was going to be a challenge. Our teams went back and looked at that feedback, and what we were able to do is propose a different plan for how we would deal with students who might need to change. What we are proposing is that we will give families as much flexibility as we possibly can to switch from remote to in-person or vice versa. However, we have a couple of considerations we have to think about. If students are thinking of a transition and they were in the remote learning program and want to come in person with us, then we need to make sure that those in-person cohort sizes can continue to maintain 6 feet of distance. So we would try as much as possible to place that student in a classroom in their sending school. If for some reason, though, we were creating a situation that would be unsafe, you know, we could wait, offer a family an opportunity to wait for an enrollment possibly to open up, or we could look across the district and offer another opportunity in one of our other schools. We know that's not necessarily what parents would want, and they certainly have the opportunity to decline that and stay fully remote. But we do have to make sure those safety considerations are primary. Within that, though, we're happy to work with anyone at any point, as long as it's a reasonable request that we can fulfill safely. If we're thinking of moving a student from the in-person program to a fully remote program, then the consideration really is around the class size and fully remote. There are no safety considerations, certainly, but there are definitely learning considerations. We know it's particularly at the elementary level, students do not learn the same way in a fully remote environment that they learn in person. And from a teaching and learning perspective, it's very difficult to manage a large group of kindergartners, first and second and even third graders, even fourth graders, on a Zoom call. You know, and I don't want to minimize the challenge of doing that with any grade, because I think there are challenges, but particularly with our youngest students, large groups are difficult. And so educators at the youngest grades will be planning to do smaller breakout sessions throughout the day. And if we continue to increase those class sizes beyond the kind of individual attention that educators can give students, then we degrade the learning experience for students in that program. So we have considerations both ways. I want to be transparent about that, but we are going to try and work with families to the greatest extent possible. There were very few changes to our staffing model at the junior high and high school. The only update there was that we are looking at that revised practice for providing families flexibility to switch back and forth. The other update I have for you is pending your vote tonight. We are asking you to yet again revise the school calendar. We heard from the Commissioner of Education over the last week that he has worked with MTA and AFT at the state level, and they agreed to actually 10 days of professional learning and training for educators prior to the start of the school year. There's a lot of work that's going to go into opening up classrooms again for our educators. So we are required to provide the 10 days. We had additionally scheduled 3 days before the start of the school year. We've decided that we don't need 13 days before the start of the school year, but what we're going to do is plan 11 days before the start of the school year, and then we'd like to plan one additional day to come back with educators in October, so that would give everyone a chance to kind of get their feet under themselves over the first month of school, come back and have a professional learning day in October and regroup, and then do the same thing around the election day in November. So the calendar change that you see, and I don't want to steal Marie's thunder, but essentially what we're proposing is 11 days before the start of the school year. That would have us start on September 14th. We would then plan the professional day in October. I believe we settled on the Friday before the Columbus Day weekend as a way for families to be able to take that break of a weekend. And then in November, we did plan for the election day. We thought, you know, it's going to be a challenging day, I think, for many people, but we really had a hard time having another day off. And where there was no school already on election day, we decided we wanted to put it there so that we weren't disrupting education later. So with that, I'm happy to take questions and answers. I did provide a couple of possible motions for you in the memo. The first one, which is our administration's recommendation, would be for you to approve the transition to school plan as published, including the recommendation to begin the year in a hybrid model. But I just want to I did put the caveat in there that should public health data change, the administration and specifically I would have the flexibility, obviously, to respond to public health data and make the appropriate call as we progress toward the start of the school year. But I also recognize as a committee, you may feel differently about this decision, and so I provided alternate language for you to either decide to come back fully in person or in a fully remote learning environment. So those were the two recommended motions, but we'll come back to questions and answers.
All right, so everyone, Diane has noted that I don't like multi-part questions. So I think tonight especially, as you raise your hand and choose to comment, can you just keep that in mind that really there's going to be a lot of talking, a lot of people want to participate, a lot of people have thoughts and questions, and I imagine there are a lot of people in the audience that do as well. So in the interest of time, if you can limit it to one question at a time, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to call on you again. I promise I will, unless, you know, we're here at 11 o'clock. Yes, Diane?
Can you tell me again what the class sizes were? I think you said 24.
Oh, wait, sorry, Diane. I didn't realize you were going to actually ask a question at the moment. I
Oh.
thought you wanted a clarification. I'm sorry. I'm
no,
almost.
no, no.
I'm almost done.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. And I was just going to say, for those that weren't here at the beginning of the meeting that are in the public, we're not going to use the Q&A function. So if you have a question that isn't answered by a question that a committee member asked or something else, then I'd really ask that you raise your hand so that we can call on you. Okay, Diane, go ahead.
So I heard you say 24 students for class size, that's average. And so I was just wondering if we're outside of class size guidelines of our policy in kindergarten through third grade.
Marie, do you want to speak to that?
Are you talking about the remote students or the in-person students?
Remote.
It's possible that some of the remote classrooms will be a little bit above class size guidelines, but it is a different environment. And teachers will be able to meet with students half and half in small groups, in breakout rooms, et cetera. But we could go as high as 25 even in the younger grades.
Can I also ask about preschool?
You mean the class sizes?
Just what's going on with pre-K?
That's two
Do you want me
questions. No, wait, that's two questions. No. I can't start that way. We'll come back to it if someone else doesn't ask that. All right. John?
I'd like to make a motion for the purpose of, I believe that these discussions are better when a motion is on the table so that it grounds the discussion.
John, I really don't want to. I don't think it's appropriate because I understand your feeling, but given that we have 163 attendees, it's going to get lost. So I really don't want it to frame the conversation that way.
Then I'll ask one question.
Go ahead.
And that is, given the levels of elementary enrollment, it seems that it would be possible to close the Gates building, which would have health and safety benefits to the community. I was wondering if that is something that in your busy schedule had been considered.
Sure, we actually did consider that. And, I think we looked at the possibility, we're actually about 2 or 3 classrooms shy of really being able to do it because Gates will still have, I believe, Marie, 11 classrooms and Conant had 13 classrooms left. We don't have that many full rooms, even with utilizing music rooms and art rooms available at the Conant School. We had toyed with the idea of having the modulars moved over to Conant, but the problem would be we actually reached out to the building project team as well and had them do an analysis of cost savings and or timeline savings. The building still could not be completed within the year. And so we would have to go back to Gates the following year. So even saving on modulars right now, I think would end up, we would have to bring all of our students back, move the modulars back from Conant to Gates the following year. And I think for that level of disruption to our students, I don't foresee it being something we're pursuing. We are looking at options through our project manager of maybe delaying purchase of the modulars by 1 year, where we could get a reduced rate on the modulars, and the company might be able to essentially lease out the modulars so they can still make some profit on them over the course of this year. So there's still a lot in process on that, but we have done a preliminary analysis, and it doesn't quite work out where we could combine the 2 schools.
Ginny?
I would like to know about preschool class sizes and configurations and et cetera. Just
Sure. So the preschool actually will be fully in person because it's a specialized special education program, but let me bring Debbie Dixon onto the panel and she can talk to that. All right, Debbie, I think, here, I'm going to promote you to panelist, Debbie.
Good evening. So the Department of Education has advised that high-need students and preschoolers return to school fully in person and with a full schedule. What our early childhood coordinator has just completed is a survey of parents asking if they want to return fully in person or stay in a remote mode. And I don't have the specific data in front of me. I can get it and share that with you, but it seems that there's a split, and what we'll be doing is providing both the remote instruction for those families and children who have requested that, and then in-person instruction for the others. Again, we just received that data this morning or yesterday.
Evelyn?
So I have a question about safety. Thinking about our teachers and our kids, given that the CDC recommendations evolve so quickly, we just got thrown a curveball this week that all of our providers have to wear eye shields, like goggles, to protect themselves. I'm just interested in learning how closely the school is following these guidelines and how quickly we can pivot to keep our kids and the teachers safe.
Sure, that's a great question. I'll let Dawn, maybe elaborate on a little bit on that because she was working with the operations group, but we already have purchased full face shields for every educator in the district in addition to the mask that they'll have. So I think we're actually well suited to be able to pivot to something like that. But Dawn, do you want to jump in?
Nope, you said it.
That was it? Okay, I thought there might be more, but that was it.
Nope.
So, we know this is an ever-evolving process, and you know, we're committed that if something changes, and I think we've seen changes on at least a weekly basis, if not sometimes several times a week, we're having to go back, revise guidelines, think differently about PPE, but we want to make sure we maintain the most current practices.
Angie?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you mentioned that we use relative data to make our decision. So the question, because I think one of the big fear is, what about if there's a case in town? So is there a system or a process that we can keep track of the confirmed cases in town or the towns of the staff that they're coming from? And how do we get the data and how do we make the decision?
Sure. Dawn, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure.
You
So
can do some, I'll do some.
if there's a case in town, if it's not anything that would affect any students and the individual who contracted the virus is not somebody that we would consider a close contact, then we wouldn't make any changes operationally because it wouldn't affect our schools. The cases that we're going to be monitoring, and we are working, we have a meeting set up actually in a week to meet with the 2 boards of health and the 2 town managers to talk a little bit more about what our communication protocols will be around information sharing back and forth. We're both governed by different federal laws. We comply with FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights to Privacy Act, and the healthcare folks are under HIPAA. So slightly different slightly different laws there, but both really aimed at privacy. Our goal, obviously, is to share any data that we have about it to our local health departments so that they can be helpful. They're doing a lot of the contact tracing, and so they'll be helpful with that. We also have systems in place for our nurses to monitor and our HR folks to monitor staff cases and student cases and family cases sort of as they come up. So that'll be data that we pay really close attention to. And then depending on where that, you know, if we end up with a case in a classroom or we end up with a suspected case, there are protocols for all of that.
So I would also encourage, you know, all of our families to go online. We actually publish that right on our website, our protocols for every different situation that's likely to arise with respect to either a student or a staff member who might bring the virus into the school, or similarly what can happen in terms of the community. The bigger picture, I think, was the second part of that question, which is what metrics might you look at to make decisions. So that's something that we actually have an upcoming meeting with our Board of Health because we can't solely determine the metrics. That's not really, you know, an educational decision, but that's something we want to work with our Educator Association as well as our local Board of Health to make sure that we have really good, clear metrics around what might constitute closure or reopening further.
We also anticipate the Department of Education mentioned last week on a call that they were anticipating providing districts with guidance around that as well. So we're hoping that something comes from the state that will be a little more helpful as well.
Thank you.
John?
To follow up on the data point, as we were meeting on Wednesday, it happens that the state issues their weekly report on all of the communities on Wednesdays. And so about an hour ago, they published that, which shows that Acton in the last 14 days had 4 cases for a positivity rate of 0.6%, and Boxborough had 2. So there's another mechanism people can use to follow, you know, all the communities in the Commonwealth are there. And the comment that I wanted to make is that we've talked a lot about the specific things that will happen in schools with respect to masks and distance. But these numbers, whether they go up and down, and whether we, you know, ultimately go back, you know, in a hybrid model or remote, are impacted by our behavior. And the very first part of that behavior, and I'm saying this really because we're fortunate tonight to have such a large audience that determines whether or not people are becoming infected, is are you coming in close contact with other people? And that risk increases as the function of the number of people that you come in contact with and the time. So if the numbers are going up here, it's because of things that we are doing. You know, if we're going out to the beach, you know, whatever, to the bar with our friends, or somebody said it was time to throw a backyard party, that's what will drive these numbers up or down. And then I want to make a very specific appeal for everybody in the school community as we go into this next year. For people who have seen what has gone on at universities, a lot of universities, and this is also embedded in some of the travel guidance, say you should quarantine for 2 weeks. And the reason for that is, if everybody just went into a hole for 2 weeks, the virus would be gone. It needs to get from person to person. So as we get to September 1st, and we're 2 weeks away from the start of school, if everybody makes a note to make a special effort, to minimize the number of contacts, and to be particularly careful about these precautions, we will start the school year, however we elect to start it, in the safest possible condition. And the only way that we can do that is if we as a community decide to do that.
John, I'm going to remind you to keep your mask on while you're talking. I'll be like Speaker Pelosi, right? You got to keep it on. And then shout from the pulpit, though. Angie, did you have another question?
Yeah, I think I asked before, but can you also clarify? I think a lot of parents are concerned about the facility, the air filters, the windows, and if the teachers sharing devices.
Sure, absolutely. And Dawn, do you want to jump in on this one? Because I know your team is working on this.
Yeah, so there's a really extensive piece in our back to school guidance around our HVAC systems, around the ventilation, around the filters that we use, also language around the classrooms and the spaces with non-operable windows or no windows, where we are committed to providing the HEPA air purifiers for those particular spaces. So hopefully folks have had a chance to read those particular pieces. We feel really confident in our facilities and in our ability to make sure that the air is being circulated, ventilated, and everything's happening that needs to be happening to ensure that teachers and students are safe.
Yeah, so there's also, as I think Dawn just said, there's a memo on our website that will detail this, but there's 2 main standards that we've been using to measure, and one is by CDC, and their recommendations for safe and healthy buildings around COVID-19, and the other is ASHRAE, which is a standard industry metric around buildings. So all of our systems actually meet or exceed both of those standards. So, for example, the recommended air filter is a MERV 13 air filter in the era of COVID. The industry standard is, I believe, MERV 8. We've been using MERV 13 for several years. We upgraded a while ago. That already exceeds that. And then as Dawn, I think, just mentioned, and I apologize because there's a lot of information going around, but, any area that doesn't have operable windows, we are installing air purifiers.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ben, I see your hand up.
Okay, so it's great. School district offers a 10 days training program for the teachers, and that's very good for safety perspective and also learning experience. But also this improve the HVAC equipment and so on. Those these are great. But I would like to point out safety relies on the person as well, right? Not only just the equipment. So providing the training to the teacher, that's very important. But I just wonder, does the school district plan to offer some training for the students as well about enforcing these 3 measures about the social distancing, masks and hygiene? Because the kids are really, when they play high and they are not gonna keep these 3 measures in mind, right? That's very difficult, even for adults. Sometimes it's just to lose track of those. So that's one. So second one is also the training for the student to improve the learning experience for both in-person and those remote learning options. Have the school district considered taking that into account?
So,
Peter, I can take the first
I was
part.
going to say, Dawn, if you want to take the first one, and maybe Deb, you can jump in on the second.
Yeah, so I greatly appreciate, we actually spent today in a leadership retreat and we talked a lot about human behavior and how so much of this is dependent on each one of us. John just mentioned that as well. And it will absolutely be critical as we continue to work together to keep one another safe. and healthy. One of the big factors we always are going to be looking at is time, and we know that exposure to the virus in short amounts of time is not nearly as bad as, you keep hearing people sort of refer to this 10 to 15 minute window of sort of prolonged exposure where folks are exchanging sort of aerosolized particles or airborne particles. And when we talk about students, part of the work that we intend to do with our educators, we're plotting out those 11 days that happen before school starts. And part of the work will be that we expect educators to be working with our families and with our students to educate them about what is school going to look like, what are they going to have to do. We will be bringing some students in, like I know kindergarten, for instance, will still do some sort of an orientation. And to the extent possible, small groups of families. We're battering around all sorts of ideas right now. And so really thinking about how do we get small groups of people in to sort of practice what this looks like in a real school building. And absent that, we know we're hoping to work on some videos, but education will definitely be a piece where we're working with the families and the students to help them understand the expectations and how it'll be really hard for everybody.
Just
on
to
the same-
add on to that,
Go ahead.
sorry, Deb, I think one thing we recognize is that as we transition back to school and we do get our students in, a lot of the focus in those initial days and even weeks is around safety protocols and also making sure that students are taken care of socially and emotionally as we continue to then ramp up the learning at the same time. So, we know that that's going to take time to make sure that students really deeply understand what our safety protocols look like, they practice them. That's going to be a lot of our work with educators in those additional days before school starts to make sure educators are comfortable with what has to happen with kids, because we know that it's one thing to produce a written plan. It's a whole nother world to actually bring that into classrooms and have that happen with kids.
So along the same lines as Don was talking about, being able to educate our students and also our families, to support our families with the learning, whether it's in the hybrid version or in the remote learning version. What we want to do is make sure that we're keeping the essential components, we call those core components for teaching, intact. We know that building relationships with children, creating a warm environment for them, a caring environment is important for learning. We know that making sure students understand why they're learning something and what they're learning is important, as well as making sure that they have a sense of agency, so that feedback for them, some choice in what they're doing, and then also making sure that everything is accessible, the learning is accessible for them. And so taking those core design elements and then figuring out how to make those all work in those two different environments. We'll be doing a lot of work with our teachers in those 11 days. We're also preparing some handbooks for our teachers, some guidebooks about how to proceed with those. We're providing some professional learning from some outside resources, some from inside resources, and then also preparing some guides for families in ways that they can support students in that, and then also for our students themselves, whether it's something as simple as Zoom etiquette, or it's how to engage with your teacher, how to give feedback to your teacher. We most definitely want to hear from our students what's working, what's not working. And we talked about that today at our retreat, that one of the core structures we have to put in place is engaging with our families and hearing our students all the time to make sure that we are responding to their needs.
Adam, I see your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, first of all, I want to express my gratitude for the depth of effort that's been put into the plan. And my question is sort of what happens if? So if for some reason we choose to go with a fully remote program for the year, we do have a number of students who are particularly high needs who are in, if they are in person. So if we do go fully remote, is there a way for some of those particularly high need students to still get the services that they need that may be required in person?
Debbie, do you want to take that one? And there you go.
Sure. Our goal is to work with as many children with special education needs as possible. We're prioritizing our high needs students. If there's a school closure that's due to health and safety, we would not be able to provide those services in person to the children. However, if the school closure is due to other reasons like cohorting or a building, I don't know, if we have too many numbers, I guess, we can still provide those services in person. But if it's a health reason, we wouldn't be able to do that. That would be putting too many people at risk.
My question is particularly if we opt for an in-person only program for the year or for the first half of the year, and there is no hybrid option available.
I couldn't hear the question. It's
So Debbie, I think the question was if we opt, based on current public health data, say the school committee opts to go with only remote learning for the year, would the current circumstances allow for some of our students to come in and receive services?
Yes, I believe so. We're actually starting to do that next week with some of our students who are attending summer programming. Yeah, so the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Nora?
So in addition to addressing these important concerns about physical health that we've been talking about, that you've detailed thoroughly, which I really appreciate, a lot of parents that I've been talking with have questions about other concerns for their children who have been feeling isolated or really lagging educationally because they weren't able to benefit from remote learning, and that parents feel they couldn't benefit from it. So I'm just wondering what are the different ways that the district is looking at really supporting the social emotional well-being and health of students who are coming in after having been in this period of isolation for so long. And this is probably an second question, I'm not sure, but learning standards, I think, learning goals, parents have really been wondering about that too.
That is totally a second question.
I snuck it in there.
No.
I snuck in a little second
Let them answer the question
Okay.
about social emotional, and then
Okay.
we'll see.
I guess it's only two questions if you see social emotional learning is different from academic learning.
Thanks, Peter.
No problem. And in all honesty, I said that on purpose because I think we see them as the same thing. We know that, students are going to come in with social emotional needs, but in all honesty, you can't meet students' academic needs if you don't first meet their social emotional needs. And so maybe start off, maybe Dawn, you can start and talk about a little bit of the professional learning we're thinking about for educators coming in at the beginning of school and some of the philosophy of what we're doing, and then we'll turn it over to Deb to talk about specific learning standards.
Sure. So our focus when we return is to help to shrink the change, what we're calling, I call shrink the change. If educators have to think about the entire year at one time, that's going to be incredibly overwhelming. And so we're really working to get them to really just think about the first 4 weeks of the school year, during which time our only goals at that time are to establish relationships, to build communities, caring, collaborative communities of learners, and to really work with students around helping them think about their identities, what kind of identities and diversity exist within the class, how do we celebrate those sorts of things. And so really working to help students be able to bring their entire selves to school. And we're bringing in folks from I'm going to get the name wrong. We have a partnership with them for a program we have at the high school for students who are returning from medical absences and students who also are often chronically absent for reasons related to mental health. So that group, Brookline Medical Center, I think, is coming to do some training with all of our staff around the first day we're back, or the second day we're back, actually, they'll be working with all of our teachers around self-care and how do we take care of ourselves as educators. If our teachers can't put the mask on first, no pun intended, then they're not going to be able to take care of the students who are in front of them and their families. So we know that that's a critical piece of what we'll be doing, and we really want to set the stage with the fact that when we talk about social emotional learning, it's for our teachers and for our students. And then we're going to be working with them on a set of practices that we're really calling resilient practices. So rather than thinking, and it's through a trauma-informed lens, knowing that a lot of our students and families have experienced a lot of different types of grief, whether it's grief at losing what school was and what we thought it was, to family gatherings, to all sorts of things, to folks who have really lost loved ones due to COVID, or have seen other folks affected deeply by it. So there's a lot of emotion behind all of this, and we want to make sure that our educators take care of themselves first, and then can really work with our students and families to think about what that means in the classroom. And so they're going to be working with us on building resilient practices that are brain-based, and that it's setting up routines and structures and really safety sorts of things to support students throughout the day.
And we know we don't have time for a full graduate course or multiple graduate courses on trauma-informed care. But I think what we're trying to do is focus our professional learning on the protective factors that we know through the trauma-informed care lens. And because that's really what can educators do to help kids coming in. So Deb, do you want to talk a little bit about learning?
Sure. And so we have a subgroup, about 13 educators and district school leaders, working on a guidebook for all teachers, but first to start with all department leaders, coordinators, building leaders, to work with educators about how to address what we're calling unfinished teaching and learning. And so we know that there was learning loss last spring. We know there's also learning loss throughout the summer. And so there's a couple of different steps that we need to take. And we need to have this guidebook so there's some consistency across the district and how we approach this. And so one of the first things we need to do is to identify from this year for grade level content in all the different disciplines or course level content, what are the most important critical standards, whether that's content, whether that's concepts or skills that our students need to learn this year. We also then need to look to see what came right before that as prerequisite skills. And so by identifying those prerequisite skills, we can then assess our students and better understand where their needs are in order to address them so that they can access in time. We're calling it just in time, just the right amount of learning that needs to take place so they can then access the most critical standards for this year's learning. That way we keep everyone at grade level, we keep everyone at course level. There might be more that needs to be addressed for some students than others, but that's what we need to find out. And we're going to do that in several different ways. The first is that we're going to employ some universal screeners from K through 8, both in mathematics and in English language arts. And then at the high school level, one of the wonderful benefits that came out of last year was that our disciplines were creating common assessments. So we have what we call classroom-based measures that they can go back and they can use because they've identified what those critical learning standards were for each one of those courses. And they can use those to figure out where students are and what they need to go back and figure out what they need to bring forward so that students can access the most critical learning this year. So we'll be doing all of that in concert with some ongoing formative assessments to make sure that we are getting a sense of where students are and how to guide our instruction going forward. So all of that is being presented to all of our staff. We'll also be training our staff on how to use these universal screening tools and to understand how to use the results of those screeners to inform their practice going forward. So it's going to be a combination of things. We do have some information from the Department of Ed from last year about what those critical standards were for each of the different disciplines at the grades, which is very helpful for us. But we also know internally, we'll take that and also look at our own courses to see what is important and make those decisions. We'll be doing that at K-6 as a district. So all teachers will be working under the same critical standards. And then grades 7 through 12, they'll be doing that by department to identify what those critical learning standards are.
you mind if I just jump in with one thing? I'm seeing people continue to ask questions in the Q&A on the webinar format. Just to be clear with anyone listening, this is not a webinar. It's just a school committee meeting where we happen to use the webinar function to be able to host the meeting appropriately. So unfortunately, we're not able to go into the Q&A to answer questions. So we would have to do the raise hand function when we get to the public participation portion.
Thanks, you beat me to it.
Oh, is that what you were thinking too?
It was.
Okay.
I'm actually going to ask a question. You spoke to preschool, and you made a comment earlier about kindergarten, and when you came to us a couple weeks ago, there was a potential schedule shift for kindergarten. I just wanted to know where we are with kindergarten.
Yep. Marie, do you want to talk to that?
Sure. So kindergarten parents have been notified. We are not having an all-day kindergarten this year. We told you that at the last meeting. Kindergarten will be 4 days a week, half days. So students will either be in a morning cohort or an afternoon cohort. So rather than go 2 full days in a cohort, we went with 4 half days. And the rooms will be cleaned in between, and we think this is better for kids in many ways.
Angie, did you have another question?
Yes. So, do we have a process, especially in the remote learning mode, for the remote learning student, that we are able to collect student feedback to improve the learning experience? Because in the spring semester, that even with the same subject, there can be some discrepancy in student experience. So I was trying to see if we are able to have like a process, be able to, because there may be some just minor fine tune, then student will be learning better, will have a better learning experience.
Sure. And I know a lot of our educators already survey their students on a pretty regular basis, but Deb, do you want to talk to how that works?
Sure. So their teachers, especially the junior high and the high school, will be the same teachers students would have in person. And so I think one of the things that, again, one of those core components that we're putting in place as a structure to guide us this year is to make sure that we are always including student voice. And so how teachers go about doing that might vary. There are lots of different online tools that teachers use to take survey data, to get feedback around different kinds of activities that students are involved in, to take the pulse of where students are emotionally for beginning of a class. And so we'll be employing a lot of those tools. Right now, we're creating what's called a digital toolbox for all of our teachers. And so we're standardizing some of the digital tools, and we're identifying which ones are good for assessments, which ones are good for collaboration for our students, which ones are good for student engagement. Some of those tools work really well to get immediate feedback from students as well. So we can employ those kinds of tools online in a remote setting. We can also do some other kinds of just, reaching out to students and having questions that they answer for us so that teachers can get that kind of information to adjust their practice. So it's one of the pieces that we think is really important going forward, is to always hear our students' voices and to fine tune what we're doing. One of the benefits of having the Wednesday collaborative time is so that our teachers can meet together, and we talked about this today. We want to structure that time for them to also work together to find out what's working well, what's not working well, what do we need to adjust? And the way for us to know that is to work with our students and to hear our students' voices.
And if I'm not mistaken, I actually believe the high school did survey students in the spring, right as they were finishing up the school year, to get an understanding of student perspectives on the distance learning experience. And then they did use that to help inform planning for this year.
Thank you. Evelyn?
Yeah, so what is the school doing to support kids that may want to go remote, but may not necessarily have the resources to enable them to do that? So for instance, I know that the school is providing Chromebooks for all kids, but I'm thinking about the kids that may not necessarily have access to internet to be able to connect to join remote classes and stuff like that. What's the school doing for kids like that?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So last spring, one of the initiatives we did was to make sure that all of our students had internet access, and if they didn't, we actually purchased a Wi-Fi hotspot as a school district, and we paid the monthly fee for that, and then gave that to the family to make sure that families had access as well. You know, we sent out multiple communications, but then in addition, some of our teachers who might work with populations who may not have access to some of the, you know, emails that we send out, things like that, also did a lot of individual outreach. So some of our EL teachers did a lot of outreach for us. Some of our special educators did a lot of individual outreach, and then helped principals to understand who may be missing Wi-Fi access. So we will continue to do that to make sure that everyone has the appropriate access. But that certainly was a challenge because, you know, the easiest way that we have to send information out is through a survey to find out who needs different kind of health and human services supports, but that doesn't always get to everyone, so oftentimes we're relying on our educators, but they did a great job making sure they communicated with us about what kids needed.
Peter, is it okay to jump in?
Sure.
With a little bit? So I'm thinking around the elementary piece. I also wanted to make sure that folks know that we're balancing the kinds of online activities with also hands-on activities for students. It's not going to be all screen work and screen time. And so to the question that was just asked about resources and materials and supplies, we're also putting together for all of our students what we're calling go bags, where there will be general supplies for all students that will go back and forth in their backpacks if you're a hybrid student. And if you're a remote student, you'll also receive those supplies so that you can be home doing those kinds of activities. So whether it's basic things like glue and sticks and scissors and markers and color, or specific mathematical manipulatives that you may need to do the mathematics activities, or some of the science pieces, utensils that they'll need in order to do some of the science work. We just think it's really important that our students have these materials, whether they're in person or they're remote, so they can also do things off screen.
I actually have a question around special education, and it really could be for remote or in person, but the webinar around special education didn't really answer too many of the questions about what might happen to kids and their IEPs. In the spring, kids had adjusted sort of learning plans given that we were in crisis mode, and those varied widely across grades and across districts, but especially when we're contemplating a hybrid mode return where I understand we're prioritizing kids who receive many of their services outside of the regular education classroom, but there's lots and lots of kids who have learning center time every single day, and we're not going to be in school every single day. And the remote days, to the best of my understanding, are you know, independent learning days. So has there been any thought given, or are there any updates on things that we're considering or working towards so that we could give a little peace of mind to some of these parents on who have kids with IEPs?
I'm happy to answer that. We are, the learning in the fall is very different than what we provided in the spring. The guidance from DESE is that we will be providing much more robust instruction. In the spring, our goal was to maintain connections. It was to engage students and to basically keep kids maintain skills. Moving forward into the fall, we are back in the teaching and instruction mode, whether it be in person or remote. We are obligated to provide all of the services on the IEP. We will be documenting that in the form of they're not calling it a distance learning plan, but we will be providing all of the services. It might not necessarily mean 5 times 45. We're looking for a little bit more guidance from DESE and clarity on some of the guidance that they've provided, but we are prepared to do this both remotely and in person. I don't know if that answers your question.
Sort of. I mean, I think that I'm thinking like junior high and high school level in particular, there are many students that go to a learning center every day. And so if you were to just go with their in-person days, that's 2. So that's half of what they would be receiving in support if something else isn't done on those independent days.
So we are actually thinking about that and looking to deploy our staff, both the professional staff and the assistants that work with us, to support children across the entire week. So we're just getting the data on which students have selected what mode of learning. And we're sitting down with the team coordinators, the building special ed coordinators and principals soon to start looking at the high need students and then other students and how we can implement the services within the schedules and within the confines of the hybrid learning plan. And we're, as I said earlier, we're going to try to maximize the time with every single student as best we can to make it a meaningful and productive experience.
Thanks. All right, John, did you have a question?
This is a little bit different take on a question that I think is being asked, but maybe just a little bit less directly. One of the objectives of the district is to provide equity in education. And by way of where we are, the professional education of our staff is all based on an in-person model. And the great bulk of their experience is based on an in-person model. So if we're to look at our ability to work toward that goal of providing equitable opportunities, how would you rank the three modes that we have discussed? A full in-person mode, a hybrid mode, and a remote mode. Which one best enables the district to work toward equity?
You know, I would unequivocally say that we are at our best in offering the highest level of equity when we're fully in person. And, you know, now we know that public health data and the safety measures we need to take are prohibiting that right now. But right now, we really believe that we're providing a higher level of service by having students with us in person, at least on a partial week basis. You know, the remote environment, I think, provides, you know, a myriad of challenges in terms of meeting students where they are. There are some services that are nearly impossible to provide in a remote environment. And, you know, while we can try to do that, we also want to make sure, even in the remote environment, there will be some services that we would try to provide in person. And so, you know, I think the schools have been designed to be in-person environments. And that's, I don't know another way around that other than just say it's in-person is by far the most equitable, and then everything else is trying to work through that.
Diane?
I'm just going to respond to what John said. I think the intention of our district in the long-range strategic plan and goal setting was to move toward equity of outcomes and not just equity of access. Equity of access is critical, but we really want both. And I think that this situation with COVID has unfortunately forced us back into a mode where we're struggling to provide equity of access. And we are being, you know, we are successful in some ways, but it's a challenge. So I think that you need to keep that in mind, that, you know, kind of all bets are off in terms of a progression along the continuum we expected to be on before this hit.
Adam?
I'm going to try to turn my video off to see if I come through clearer. I'm getting some nods, yes. So my question is around actually meals, and I'm not so worried about school lunch as it relates to lunchtime at the for folks who are in the building. What I'm more concerned about is those people who might be economically disadvantaged or who get free and reduced lunches who are in a hybrid program. Are there plans in place now to make sure that during those days when they are remote, they still have access to nutrition?
Yes, I'll actually let Marie talk to that.
Sure. So as you know, we've been continuing to provide lunches for pickup and delivery 3 days a week all summer. Effective August 26th, we're going to move to a model where once a week we're going to have families come and pick up grocery bags that will include enough food to provide 5 breakfasts and 5 lunches for their children. And we're going to do that on Wednesday when there aren't students in the building. So we're going to have a curbside pickup and the option for delivery, and we're going to give groceries that would provide 5 breakfasts and lunches per week.
Ginny?
I wanted to just follow up on what Debbie said. I understand that you're just getting the numbers now, but I just wanted to understand the process. So, like the concern, that Tessa had, that the kids who used to get, a period a day of learning center support are now going to school 2 days a week, and we're not sure exactly how that support is going to be provided for every kid. Is that correct? You're working it like child by child, plan by plan?
We have to.
Okay. Okay, I
we
just
have-
wanted to, yeah, no, I get that. So, but how are parents going to be involved in that or able to advocate for more or different solutions? Is that just going to be team meetings, or how is that going to look?
It won't be team meetings per se, but it will be communication from the building-based coordinator and the family, and there will be discussions, and we can't do anything without parent participation and support and discussions. So that will occur with every single family of with a student on an IEP.
Okay.
We've got a lot of work ahead of us. We have over 900 students on IEPs. We're starting with our high needs students based on criteria set forth by the Department of Education. Those are that's probably easier. And then we will look at every single student and look at their IEPs and the services and figure out the best way we can meet all of the services outlined on the IEP. And as I said, I'm not sure that the state's intent was that if an IEP says 5 times 45, that it continues to be 5 times 45. It could be that we bundle time in one day, or we adjust the time. But those are the conversations that we have to have with each family. We want to provide all of the services. And we want students to make progress. We want them to be engaged. We want them to be learning.
Thank you.
Debbie, just to follow up on what you said, has there been any consideration given, and I understand the enormity of the task in front of you, I 100% do. 900 students on IEPs is a lot of personalized attention to be giving to schedules, which are really hard to make. So I totally understand that. There are also many families that have multiple students on IEPs, and I wonder if any consideration has been given to, I know we've talked a lot about ensuring that all family sibling groups are put together, but I wonder if as an accommodation on IEPs that there's been any consideration given to asking families if they would actually prefer to have their children on opposite schedules so that support could be given at home on independent days to each child individually.
I haven't thought of that. I know that we were trying to keep families together, but if a family wants that, I don't see why we wouldn't be able to honor that. If that works best for the family and for the child, we would absolutely consider that. We're actually looking for lots of ideas that are creative so that we can implement all of these IEPs. And I think that's where the conversations with the building-based staff, the special education coordinators, the principals, and the families will help us come to the best solution for each child.
Thank you. Angie?
So, students going back to school and they're gonna take the exam. So I'm thinking that are we gonna take paper exam? How will the remote be graded differently from in person? How's that gonna work?
Well, I think, just to reframe it as assessment, because I think, exams and tests are one form of assessment that we use, but there's a lot of opportunities online to do assessments, in all honesty, and we've talked about this in a couple parent forums, but, I think from an educational standpoint, you might be more effective actually delivering an assessment remotely and using the time that you're with students to be able to teach, and talk with them and do group work. Whereas if the only function that you have when you come in is to give a test, that's probably not the best use of time. So I don't necessarily think assessment per se in a remote environment is necessarily more challenging. In some ways, it's actually easier. There's a lot of platforms that some can actually do automatic grading. Others, it's, submitting essays that have text boxes, things like that. But, I've taught courses in both environments myself, and I actually don't see much difference in terms of my own approach to assessment that I've used. And Deb, I don't know if you want to jump in on that as well.
Just to say that there are lots of tools out there that our teachers can, that's part of that toolbox that we're putting together for our educators, as well as some of the programs that we're using. Illustrative Math, for example, has some wonderful online assessments that they can give students, whether you're in person, again, because students are on their devices, you can do it that way, as alongside students who are doing it in the remote version. So there are lots of tools that we can use.
So the system will be the same?
Yeah, the grading system is the same for all students, regardless of which mode they chose.
Yep.
Okay, I don't see questions from the committee at the moment, so maybe we'll open it up to some of the attendees that, oh, you do? Sorry, Evelyn, I didn't see you.
Not a question, it's more of a comment, because as I listen to us speak, I just want to say that these are really unprecedented times. We don't know what is going to happen. I just want us to be cautious, and especially Peter and your team, that we're not over-promising. Things are going to evolve. As either we go remote or with a hybrid, or we go in person, things are going to evolve. And, as I listen to the IEP, I listen to kids needing help in the learning center, all these are going to evolve over time. We're going to learn as we go along. So I don't want us to make any promises to the public that we've got this all figured out 100%, because we don't. And we're going to learn together as we go along. And we have to put trust in our district and our district leadership that you're going to help us move things forward, that we as parents and as a school committee are going to help move things forward. So I just want us to be cautious about, maybe this is how I'm hearing things now, it's almost as if we've got it all figured out. But I want us to be cautious about the fact that we don't. There's still a lot of unanswered questions, and that we're going to learn as we move along.
Yep.
Thank you, Evelyn. All right, so do you, Peter, want to be able to, I think Benjamin is still elevated, right? I'm not sure if he still has a question.
I do not see him, but I see several others.
He's not raising his hand, but he's still on our screen saying talking permitted, that's why.
Yes, okay. Benjamin?
Oh, I don't have a question at this point. The presentation answered my questions, so thank you.
Sure, thank you. Violetta, you can go ahead.
You need to just unmute your microphone.
Nope, we'll come back to you, Violetta. Karen?
Hi, yes. Will ninth graders be starting one day earlier than the rest of the high school as they have in previous years? And my question comes from a concern regarding what is being done to support those students transitioning from the junior high to the high school this year.
I'm looking for Mr. Dory in the thing, and he was here. I don't know if he lost his internet connection, but I would have had him do that. I'm going to actually have to defer to him on specific high school plans, unless Deb or Don, you have a sense of what they're doing in terms of ninth graders in the first day.
I don't have any sense of that, or if that's a plan. So I would defer to Larry.
I would defer to Larry too. I would imagine in the past they've had the ambassador program to help guide students into the high school, probably checking to see at this point enrollment and what students are there and how many students. But I would defer to Larry. I'm sure they're thinking of something to help make that transition.
Yeah, I think, I know I've talked to Larry multiple times over the last few days. His biggest hurdle initially was finding out which pathway students were taking, so he knew exactly who was returning and who wasn't, and then which courses they could assign. So I know it's an ongoing process for them to be able to get to all of these answers, but I would bet that there's more information on ninth grade out specifically within the next week or so.
Peter, I see that Andrew's on here. Could he answer that question about seventh graders?
Transition? Andrew, did you hear that question? I'm unmuting you, Andrew. I'm going to promote him to panelist and see if that works. Maybe not. We're having technical problems, I think. All right. So we will have to come back to that. But if you want to give Larry Dory a call or an email, I'm sure he will be able to give you that information.
Thank you.
Sure. I see Shanu.
Hello. My question is around the pre-K. We have a daughter and we just moved into this town. We did not get into the enrollment. So is that something that's going to be open up for remote learning?
So from a pre-K standpoint, you know, pre-K kind of serves two functions. One is in special education, where we provide required services for students who qualify for special education. And then we also open up pre-K to some peers as well to be able to fill out class sizes. We are not offering a remote learning version of a pre-kindergarten for general education students, simply because we didn't feel it was appropriate to meet their needs. In terms of special education services, we are offering those remotely if families need those. So we're working with individual families on that.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, that looked like all of the hands that were raised, I think. Right?
Yep, we have
Oh,
another one.
we have another one, yep.
All right. Ashima? Whoop, I think someone moved.
Hi. I just wanted to, just in case you've covered it already, I'd apologize, but I just wanted to check I know we heard it on the webinar that testing is not on the radar, COVID testing for kids or faculty at any frequency is not on the radar. Wanted to check if there's any more information on that plan. Is that something that will be looked at? Because not testing at all is kind of closing eyes, right? So hoping that there will be some testing, even if it is a sample, random sample at less frequency. What are the plans? Would like to understand that.
So, you know, a couple of things. We have explored a couple of different possibilities that came up with regard to testing, but unfortunately it's not right now economically feasible. We looked at one through UMass Medical, which just could not pan out. We know a neighboring community was trying to do the same thing and came to the same conclusion. We also, you know, I've been in conversation with a couple of community members. One was through the Broad Institute recently, but they have not yet opened up their plans for schools, K-12. They are working with some universities. So, you know, that's something that, you know, we'll continue to explore to the extent possible. We're also trying to work with the Superintendent's Association and the Department of Education to see if we can get statewide testing, because I think that's probably the avenue that it would materialize most likely. In terms of what we can do locally, we are exploring the potential of doing sewage testing, which sounds a little gross, but viral shedding is actually an early indicator of, you know, possible cases, and that would do the same thing kind of as random sampling, where you would be able to get an early indicator of increases in the virus within a school population, as opposed to just waiting for 14 days later and hearing about them from the Board of Health. Sure, who's the,
मिनट बदल आ जाएगा मिनट बदल से अचानक नंबर आ जाएगा
yep, Courtney, I think. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for holding this. Given that high schoolers often come to school sick because they have a test or something like that, and also given the possible embarrassment of being the one student who shuts down the school because of COVID, what are our plans in terms of making sure that we are able to communicate to families and students that if they are feeling sick, that they absolutely need to stay home?
Yeah, so, you know, and I still don't see Larry here, but what I'll say is I think actually any type of attendance policy has to start with the question of how are we supporting students when they do have to stay home. Because if students don't feel supported when they're home, that will prove more challenging to get people to do the right thing. So the high school is actually working through their tutoring program to provide services to students who can't be with them during the day. And then in terms of the policy, you know, if we do see a student who's exhibiting any symptoms, and unfortunately in the era we're in, it could be a common cold, but if students do come to school with any symptoms, we are required to have them go into quarantine in a separate room in the high school until such time as a parent picks them up. They then have to go through a quarantine process or have a negative test results submitted to the school within a certain time frame. So we would much rather that people stay home when they're ill, because unfortunately the alternative ends up meaning missing a lot more time of school.
Thank you.
Sure.
Amy?
Yeah, I just have a question kind of as a follow-up to that. Can you kind of state clearly what the policy will be if students come in with allergies or stuffy noses or, you know, other kinds of things that we can't tell the difference with, whether it's like a COVID infection or just a typical cold? What is the policy, the plan?
Don, I don't know if you have anything to add, but I believe if they exhibit any symptoms, they have to stay home.
So certainly we've worked with a number of families over time whose, you know, as families fill out the initial enrollment, part of that work is to fill out health-related issues and concerns. We have a lot of families who have kids with asthma or allergies or other types of chronic respiratory conditions that certainly can mimic some of the symptoms. And, you know, we're committed to working with those particular families around that. There's also, you know, but if it becomes, you know, if the symptoms become so significant that they might be above and beyond, our nurses really have a hard job. We talked about this the other day with a bunch of them. This is a really difficult time for them because they're going to be charged with figuring out when are they calling a parent to ask the parent to come and get the child. And a lot of these symptoms, you know, we're headed into flu season, and a lot of the COVID symptoms are going to mimic, you know, our typical flu symptoms as well. And so how do we sort of flesh all of that out and, you know, not just send kids home willy-nilly, and how do we also protect everybody that's there as well? So those will be really difficult decisions that we work closely with. We have, you know, 2 physicians on staff that we consult with regularly that will absolutely be pulled into a lot of the discussions and the debate. And the State Nursing Association and the Mass Department of Health they're working on really solid guidelines as well for our nurses. So that will be probably our biggest challenge is, you know, the question that was just asked about, you know, students staying home when they're sick and families encouraging them to stay home when they're sick, and then identifying students in school when they legitimately have symptoms of concern.
That's actually in writing on our website, the guidance around that.
Kira?
So since we're on this line of talking, can you speak a little bit about how chaotic this might get during cold and flu season? And I'm worried about what might happen on this sliding scale if we do have to make a choice to go all remote. I think that disruption and that quick pivot is what a lot of parents are reacting to when they say, you know, remote didn't work for my kid in the spring. So what infrastructure and plans are we putting in place right now to think about, if we have to do this again?
So Deb, I don't know if you want to talk to some of the professional learning that we're looking at the beginning of the year, but I think one thing that we do know going into this year is that it's not going to be a surprise that we end up going remote. We anticipate that we will go remote at some point, and there's really probably fairly low likelihood that we could avoid it. So, one thing that's been a goal of ours is to make sure our educators have, access to good quality professional learning opportunities leading into the school year to be able to support them in really creating effective, remote environments. Deb, do you want to continue with that a little bit?
Sure. One of the most important things, one of the shifts from the spring going into the fall, again, is we have the opportunity to really be more thoughtful, more deliberate, more proactive in our thinking and our planning. And so we're going to be engaging in some professional learning for some outside resources to come in and help us think about designing instruction in a remote environment, in a hybrid environment. So we understand sort of big picture around what our goals are and how we can then design the learning, because the design piece is the most important foundational piece of that. The tools is something that we can do internally. We can identify the tools to help with that design, but it's that overall picture. And we want to make sure that whether you're a kindergarten teacher or you're a junior high or a high school teacher, everyone understands what it's supposed to look like and feel like and what that experience is supposed to be for students. And so that's going to be very different for us going into the fall. The other pieces, I think, are around some of the expectations, just in terms of, there are going to be expectations for student attendance. Students are going to get graded on their work. They are going to get feedback on their work. We are going to be providing families with ways that they can be active in that learning as well. And so I think all of those things together will provide a very different experience for our students than this past spring, where we were really just in a reactionary mode to the situation. People didn't even have necessarily all the things at home that they needed in order to do that kind of teaching. And so I will also say that we have spent a good chunk of this summer identifying resources and tools that will provide for whether it's a hybrid learning environment or a remote learning environment. I'll give you an example. There's something called Gizmos, and I know that's a funny name for it, but it's an opportunity, it's a tool, an online tool that provides science simulations for students. And so if you can't be physically in a classroom laboratory, you can still experience a science simulation, and you can still learn the kinds of things that you need to learn from that experience. So we've done a lot of research around what tools are out there, and we're making sure we purchase that at the district level, and our teachers get some learning about how to use those tools, whether, again, they're in the hybrid version or the remote. The hybrid gives us an opportunity for teachers, especially 7 through 12, to use them in the classroom, because again, students will be apart. They'll be using their laptops, they'll be using their Chromebooks, so they can use those tools in the classroom. And if we have to pivot, students have already experienced it, our teachers have already experienced it in the remote version. For the elementary school, those remote teachers will have, again, our curriculum coordinators, our coaches supporting them. So they'll be learning the tools ahead of time to support the remote teachers. So again, a whole lot more thought put into what kind of learning experience we want for our kids for this year.
I think also, if I can just add one thing about plans and sort of infrastructure around this. As a former Cub Scout leader, I remember distinctly working with the boys about, pack in and pack out and, leave no trace. And that's really what's going to be happening every day when our cohorts come in and then when our cohorts leave. So because they'll, the same desk will be used the following day, or in the case of kindergarten, later that afternoon for a different cohort of students. And so all of the personal belongings, including an iPad or a laptop, Chromebook, will be going home with kids regularly. So I think that also is different, rather than us figuring out at the last minute, how do we get all this equipment to kids? That'll be part of our structure.
It looks like we have another question from the audience.
Okay. Nicole, you can talk.
Is there a plan that the Acton Boxborough Education Association is advocating for?
I would let anyone from the association speak if they want to. and that we can certainly come back. I think, we want to make sure that the association can speak if they want to, and, certainly provide that opportunity. Sure.
I'm going to ask it.
Yeah, I don't know if that's him or not. I can't see him in the meeting. Doesn't have a last name. Oh, he's on the panel?
So Andrew, my question was, if you're here, what are some of the plans? Someone asked earlier about ninth graders starting a day early. Seventh grade is usually part of that whole process, and if there are any plans to transition seventh graders.
Hello. Sorry, I wasn't here earlier. Can people hear me okay?
Yep.
A couple of things. One is the first day of school will not be just seventh graders. We will just have blue cohort of seventh and eighth grade because our sense is on that day, whether you're seventh or eighth grade, there's going to be a lot of work to be done in terms of getting people transitioned. What we have thought about initially and we need to work on is potentially using some of those later days and those 11 prep days to think about ways to help students transition, because typically we would have sixth graders do a step-up day in the spring. Obviously that wasn't available. So we'd love to find a way to do sort of small guided tours, if that's possible, obviously in a way that's small enough cohorts where we can do it safely and comfortably. So we'll be working on that. And then additionally to that, one of the things that we'd love to explore with families is certainly some type of orientation for fully remote students, whether you are seventh or eighth grade, because you will not have had a chance to meet with your teachers in person. So I know that for families who are choosing fully remote, there may be some reluctance with doing anything in person, and we want to honor that. But at the same time, if there is some comfort in some setting where we could do something that was comfortable for families and still introducing students and teachers to each other in person, we think that that would be beneficial. We also just have the practical need of distributing Chromebooks for those who need them, or distributing other school materials that we want to make sure that families and students have at home. So that's one of the things that we're just starting to think about, but within those 11 days, we'd like to leverage some of that time towards that. Beyond that, one of the things that we're planning at the junior high school is sort of the district has a return to school website. We're trying to develop one that piggybacks off of the material that the district has posted, and then identify things that are specific to the junior high. So even if we have district guidance about pickup and arrival and things like that, there's obviously very school specific things. So we're gonna have a return to school site for the junior high, and that's gonna have a whole parent and student section as well. So between those things, we're hoping to provide useful information to families. And then certainly individual families who have unique situations, we've already been working with them. So families who certainly have questions that they think are specific to their case or to their situation, they can feel free to email us. So hopefully that gives people an initial thought about our plans.
Great, thank you. All right, Ashima?
Hi, sorry for the last time. It's a little confusing when it goes on mute and off mute. We have a high schooler as well, and we wanted to choose remote for him, but all the elective and APs and all of those were not necessarily offered in the remote option, like the computer science AP, for example. And we were our hand was tied in that case. We had to choose hybrid option. So we're wondering if that changes and hybrid option also goes remote. Would that be offered remote at that time or not offered at all?
So I would probably have you contact Mr. Dory at the high school for any specific high school course options, because I know, as they work through the number of students and their course selections for who chose remote and or hybrid programs, they're really having to evaluate exactly the courses that they're going to be able to offer.
Okay, so unless there's other questions amongst the committee, or then I think John, if you'd like to make your motion, I'll let you make your motion now, and then we can continue to have discussion.
Thank you. I move that the Acton Boxborough Regional School Committee approve the transition to school plan as published, including the recommendation to begin the year in a hybrid model of in-person learning with a fully remote option for families, with the understanding that this plan may be altered by the administration based on changes to public health information.
Second.
So is there additional discussion or questions that people on the committee have? John?
I just want to speak to the motion and emphasize the point that one of the key differences between our remote experience last year and what would happen going into the fall is that our teachers, had the better part of a year to know their students before we entered into the remote mode. I think the proposition of beginning the year fully remote with teachers having never met students in person, it's a very significant weakness of remote learning. We may, of course, wind up there because of the public health circumstance, but I'm really strongly motivated, even if we're only in person for a period of time, to make sure that we begin the year and provide that in-person contact.
Adam?
Yeah, I just want to, before we vote for this, add my support. I believe that the district has done an amazing job of considering all of the variables here. Is sitting on one of those planning committees. There's a lot of time and effort that's gone into this. There's no perfect answer, but I believe that this is the best answer for as many people in the community as possible. So I think, again, thank you to the district and the administration, the people who've been working on those committees. And this is a really hard choice, but I'm definitely in support.
Ginny?
Thanks. I just wanted to say that I know, there's a lot of fear. Everybody's afraid. This is a really scary time. But I think we really have to spend more time focusing than we have been, or at least than I've seen, on the significant disadvantages of remote learning, especially to our most vulnerable students and our youngest students. And to me, it just seemed like if there's no workable solution to provide education remotely to kids who just can't learn remotely for reasons of age or any other reason. And so I feel really strongly that it's important to at least start off in person, establish relationships, and and keep checking the data every single day, as I know that you will, Peter. And I also want to say that I think our district has put forward an incredible effort. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to vote for some in-person return to school.
Evelyn?
I would say that I agree with Jeannie and Adam and John's sentiments around this, and to say that I think that it's our responsibility. We're here because the community put us here to support them, and the data is showing that there's a vast majority of the community that wants to put their kids back in school, knowing very well that we may have to pivot at some point depending on how things go. And I think we owe it to the 80% of the people, or how many they are, 79%, to give them that choice. We need to trial it. It may not work, but at least we're gonna try it. And if it doesn't work, we go back to the remote option, knowing that we've already set up those building blocks to be able to transition smoothly back to the remote option. And for those reasons, I personally am gonna support the hybrid model, because I think that I owe it to my community to support their wishes.
Kira?
Thanks. This is a hard choice, and I am particularly worried because I think, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that there's a bit of a plan for an inevitability that we're going to pivot. And so I think that we should, I know we're not going to change the language, but I just want the record to show, and I think that the community should hear, that this is probably not going to be the all-year plan. So we're starting this way, and we're putting infrastructure in place with the understanding that it probably is not going to remain this way. So I just don't want to set up families to think we're starting on day one and it's probably going to be this whole entire time. We need to all make plans for a pivot. But I hear that argument about starting and establishing relationships. And so I'm going to support this because I do think that that's important. But I do also want to make sure we're all very clear with our communities that we're not doing something here that will be permanent. We are doing something with the understanding that it could be any day when we have to change our minds, and families should be ready for that.
Nora?
Thank you for saying that, Kira. I think that's been the way that I've been framing this in my mind as well, that what we're offering to the community is a fully remote for the year, and then I've been thinking of the in-person or hybrid plan as really this continuum. So I find myself renaming it all the time in my mind of fully remote or continuum. And, you know, Peter, I really want to thank you and your team that's been working so hard on this, because I have heard a lot of confidence in the community that you're paying very close attention to the data and listening to experts, and that you're moving up and down the continuum of how much in-person and how much remote in response to the most relevant and current data. And so, because I do believe that kids being in person with their peers and with their teachers is extremely important to a lot of children and to families, I also would support that, knowing that it's a continuum that I would be voting for, that will be responding to current data for safety.
Angie?
Yeah, I want to ditto what Jeannie just said. I want to start saying I really appreciate that the district is spending all the planning and effort to providing this hybrid options as an option. You know, we have an option that's so important, and especially by looking at the survey data, and there's essential needs for the students' wellness and the family balance. So I also support that we're starting with the hybrid, and by knowing that there is possibility that and giving the flexibility be able to change. I really appreciate that.
Amy?
All right, I'm just going to jump in real quick and echo what everyone said, that I am floored by the administration, Marie and Peter and Deb and Dawn, and I mean, the work 24/7 since this whole thing started, 24/7. I know Peter was on his family vacation and all day on meeting calls. I was on some of them with him. So the thoughtfulness, the willingness to take information and change what you thought you were going to do, and this happened multiple times. Within a week, there would be multiple changes just based on more information that came in. And that level of flexibility, but still keeping that razor vision to do what's best for kids is just everything that we want in our administrators and the people leading this district. So thank you very much.
Diane?
I have to say this, I'm really struggling with this decision, and I've struggled with it for many weeks now. Despite the fact that 90% of our families and many of our teachers want this, I think that there are people out there for whom this is a no-brainer, and we are not making a good choice. And I just want to acknowledge them. This is really hard because we are elected to serve students, and education is a part of their lives. I think that teachers are essential workers, and we have best practices to mitigate risk have really guided the decision making. That's been very clear from all the work that has been done. I think that the remote model, I'm watching closely. I think there's a lot of disconnection and disengagement that happened in the spring that turned a lot of kids off. And I think that that drove a lot of kids to just quest and crave the in-person model that this, the education was built to support. So I'm going to support this plan, but I do really want to acknowledge everybody in the community who may not be educators and don't really understand why we might be making the decision that we are making. It's complicated and it's student-driven, and I really do want to acknowledge the just heroic work that has been done around this by all the working groups and the district leadership team. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. In the absence of seeing anybody else's hands, I do think that we probably are ready for the actual vote. I just want to acknowledge that I too am aware, as I've been spending weeks now answering questions on Facebook from parents and acknowledging their concerns and pointing them in the right direction of answers that we may have had. And I understand the privilege of sitting at this table and having a lot more information than many families have, even though we have put out tons and tons of things. I know it can be overwhelming to read through all that stuff. And I just want to acknowledge that I have really full, what's the word I'm looking for? Assurance from the administrations. I really trust the work that has gone into this, and the idea that, you know, student and educator safety has been at the forefront of their decision making and the things that they've put in place to mitigate risk, and all while keeping student learning at the forefront of their planning. And so I also am fully in support of this vote, and I think that so much thought has gone into it, so much transparency has gone into it, and so much change may still occur with it, but I feel comfortable making the vote that I think we're going to make tonight. So we have had a motion and a second, so if I have consensus, then we'll do a roll call vote. Yes? Okay. Diane?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Evelyn? Yes. John?
Yes.
Yeben?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
And myself, yes. So that passes unanimously. I thank everybody for all of their thoughtful comments and questions, those from the community as well. And
Do you mind if I just make a comment? You know, first, I want to thank you as a committee for all of the support throughout the process, particularly those of you who were able to serve on some of the subcommittees, because I know that asked a lot of you in terms of time and energy and emotional engagement with this. I, you know, also just want to make sure I thank the whole leadership team, you know, and all of the different committees that worked on this plan. I can't tell you how many meetings we went into where I would start off by a meeting by saying, all right, we've hit a dead end there, enough of that, what's the new plan? I think, you know, I probably did that to the team a dozen times in, you know, 6 weeks. So you can think that's almost twice a week. We would hit some roadblock in planning and have to explore a new option. So to have the resilience as a set of working groups and teams to be able to work through that, and kind of the challenges of, you know, investing hours and hours and hours into a process and then realizing that you need to revise it and head to something new. You know, certainly, you know, I'm just so appreciative of everyone who's done that. I also just want to acknowledge the educators that we have, because, you know, this asks a lot of our educators as well as it does all of our leaders, and it asks a lot of our families, but our educators in particular. You know, I think the one thing we have to acknowledge is any form of bringing students back asks a lot of our teachers, and it asks a lot of our assistant, it asks a lot of our custodians, it asks a lot of our bus drivers, and every other person that works in our schools. And I have just a really sincere level of appreciation for what we're asking of people. I've given that a lot of thought over the last few weeks as I've kind of prepared to give you my final recommendation and that of our teams. And what I ultimately come to is that, you know, for all of the challenges we know we have, I have to still believe in my heart that our kids deserve an opportunity to try and come in person. And And, and yet I balance that with this real appreciation for the level of fear that there is around what the virus can do. And, we shouldn't lose that fear of what the virus can do, because we see time and time again around our country and around the world what happens when people don't appreciate the power of the biology of this. We have to continue to take the precautions. If there's a best practice we can look at implementing, we need to continue to evolve any decisions that we've made. But I think, most of all, I think what we're going to be focused on and what we talked with our leadership team about today is, first and foremost, after we take care of the physical safety, we then have to take care of tending to the emotional safety. And that means starting with our educators. It means then working with our students, but it also means working with our families to make sure that, we're able to really build this sense of trust as we come back in. So I just wanted to make sure I took an opportunity and say that, thank the educators, thank our leaders, and thank all of you for the support along the way.
Great, thank you, Peter. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is a vote on the revision to the 2021 school calendar.
Do you want me to speak to this quickly?
Sure.
Peter already did, but the change is that the first day of school would be September 14th. We have scheduled 11 days for teacher professional days prior to school. Those would be August 26th and 27th, and then the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday before Labor Day, and then the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday after, no, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday after Labor Day. And then students would start September 14th. As you know, the Department of Education has reduced the number of school days for the school year to 170. And with an explicit requirement that we would have at least 10 professional days before students start school. So we're scheduling 11, and I missed one. It's the 26th, 27th, 28th, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, last week of August. And then the 31st of August, September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Contractually, we have the Friday before Labor Day off, and then Labor Day off. And then we would have the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday after Labor Day, leading up to students arriving on September 14th. So the change is, again, students starting September 14th. We want to get that word out to everybody as soon as possible. We have 2 other contractual professional days, and we put those in, one on Election Day, which is already not a school day, and the other one on the Friday before Columbus Day, so that families could have a long weekend. So we ask for your vote.
Marie, wait 1 second. I just want to also note, because someone pointed it out to me, that on the back of our calendar, we generally have school start times and whatnot, and I realized that we had to vote on a plan and, all of that, but just something to note. Maybe we want to even take them off at this point, just so that those who might not be paying close attention, it's at the very back. On the back of the calendar, we still have, regular school start times, which I understand that will happen, but Thursdays won't be the half-day anymore. Wednesdays will be the half-day. So just a thought to changing some of that.
Okay. The other thing I would add, and Maria, I don't know if you said this, I apologize, it's been a long day. But we're going to also add in the blue and gold cohort days onto the calendar, so people have that up front. But we also know that could change if, but we want to add that in so people know what to expect.
And can I just, one more thing. Our plan is that weeks that have holidays, we would actually have a Wednesday day of school to make up for that missed day of in-school. So an example would be September 28th is Yom Kippur. We would have the kids who would normally be here on Monday come in on Wednesday that week. And we would not have remote learning on that Wednesday, and kind of do that throughout the year, because we felt like kids are coming in 2 days a week. Many Monday holidays, they would miss too much. So.
Okay, so can I make a motion?
You can, and then Angie, I will come back. Yep.
I move to approve the revised 2020-2021 school calendar.
Second.
All right, Angie, did you have a question?
So this may be not calendar specific related, but will that, with the postpone, and when will the family knows the decision? Usually they know the, the schedule and all that by end of August. So does that mean that the family will know that later?
The cohorts?
Yeah, the cohorts, the high school, the schedule and all that. Does that mean everything postponed and to a later date?
Yes. Yeah, we know the high school is just now starting to build their schedule, now that they finally got the enrollments in, so that will probably take them at least 2 weeks, I would think, to be able to work through that, because they first have to get kids into classes and then see what the conflicts are, resolve conflicts, communicate with students and families, so that's a process. We are hoping to have cohort information, I think we're targeting within the next 2 weeks. I'd like to say we could do it sooner, but I want to be cautious about that.
Okay, did anyone else have a question about the calendar, or are we good to vote?
I have a calendar question.
Evelyn?
So at some point, I'm asking this as a newbie on the committee, how do the holidays like Yom Kippur and this and that get picked for the calendar? Does it come to the school committee to make that decision? And because I ask because I feel left out.
It does, and that is a whole.
It's never in there, so.
Sure, it does, and that is a whole nother question. It ends up being, usually when we vote on the next school year calendar, it ends up being in the fall. Is that when we usually do it? And so that has been a lengthy discussion for many years. Okay. And we went through a really lengthy process of, we had a calendar subcommittee and everything else this very last time when these holidays were decided upon, and we decided to maintain the Jewish holidays, and we added other significant holidays to the calendar so that teachers would have an awareness, so that there wouldn't be expectations, but they weren't going to be days off. So yes, the school committee is responsible for that. Okay. And it's around when we have the actual initial calendar vote. So when we would talk about the 2021-2022 school year calendar, that's when those questions.
Okay, I would table my concerns for that discussion.
Okay, thanks. Yes, Angie?
So we have less school days though. So the number of holidays, we're keeping the same, or?
Okay, so we're not changing the calendar other than this first day, because DESE changed their guidance, said we had 170 days, said that we have to put in 10 professional days. So any other questions about the calendar, we are not going to answer right now.
Right.
All right.
It goes from 180 to 170 school days.
Yeah. Okay, let's vote. Diane?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Yevon?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Great, and me, yes. All right, that passes unanimously. And now I lost my thing. Okay. Budget update. Is what's on my thing. No budget update?
Not tonight. We're going to have a budget update for you at the next meeting.
That's fine. Great. So the next one is on me, which is the subcommittee and member reports, and I was supposed to bring something for you to look at for new subcommittee and liaison assignments. And the reason that it's not here is because I wanted to have a wider discussion, because I don't think that I prepared you enough to put forth your interest. We talked a little bit about the importance of liaisons as opposed to the importance of actual subcommittees. And the reason that I bring this up is because there's 2 major subcommittees and there are 11 of us. And in order to not have a quorum, it means that somebody or somebodies cannot serve on either one of those major subcommittees. And if it were as easy as just picking somebody, I would be absolutely 100% ready to not have that additional work on my plate, but I don't think that I can help plan for town meeting in the spring if I don't serve on the budget subcommittee, so I think that that would be irresponsible. So with that said, somebody else or somebodies else need to not serve on one of those 2 major committees, and everybody that submitted interest to me would like to be on those subcommittees. So With that said, I did want to share with you some of my thoughts on some of the other things that people didn't necessarily put forth as interest, because I don't think we spent enough time talking about it. So I hope I would make Paul proud in saying that one of our real jobs as school committee members is to maintain our connection to the community. And so Paul felt really strongly and talked often about his relationships that he had developed over the years with select board members and FinCom members, and that he felt there was real importance in those liaisons or subcommittees, however you want to look at it, because our job is to listen to the community. And if we don't know what's going on in the community, then we have a hard time making decisions around the table. So while the budget subcommittee and the policy subcommittee certainly have a lot to do with how we function as a committee and how we function with the administration, there are several other roles that school committee members can fill within those other liaisonships. So I wanted to talk about some of those tonight. So one of the things is the joint PTSO. So Diane and I have spent lots of years now running this joint PTSO, and it's actually a pretty significant liaison position. What it is, if people don't know, is that all of the leaders of the PTSOs, so at every single school, there is usually a chair and a vice chair or co-chairs or however they look at it. And once a month, they come together to kind of talk about what has been going on in their schools, what questions they have, what concerns they have, and sometimes there are things around the way the PTO functions. Sometimes there are things around the way their school functions as compared to other schools. And what this whole discussion about everything has really brought up is, you know, how is the remote school going to function? Is that going to have their own sort of PTO? I know parents have been asking that question online. How are the PTOs going to pivot their the guidance and help they give their school communities when they're not going to be fundraising for things? So those are going to be really important questions this year, and I know Diane and I have talked about it, and we would absolutely love for somebody else or other people to kind of take on that responsibility of meeting with those PTO chairs, because I think that that's going to be a really important place for us to be listening to community members and their concerns, especially those parents at schools. And so that is a really important thing. And the other one I wanted to speak to, and then I'll give it to you, Diane, if there's other things you want to add to what I said, is the CPAC liaison. So I've been a CPAC liaison now for a couple of years. I think it's a really important place. For those of you who don't know, it's the Special Education Parent and Advisory Committee, and we are required to have one. Amanda Bailey and Carrie Weaver, and I believe there is a third chair that was elected this year, and forgive me because I don't know his name, but I know that it's a father. And they hold meetings once a month, usually the Wednesday prior to our school committee meetings. But actually prior to COVID, they were also meeting with the special education director. And it's a really good opportunity to go and listen and hear about what a particular community within our larger community is experiencing as far as education goes, as far as, you know, what their concerns are. We talk a lot about that at school committee, but I think it's important for people who don't have kids that have IEPs to kind of understand what's going on in that world. So that's another area where we've in the past had up to 3 school committee members who've been sitting at the table and attending CPAC meetings. And it doesn't mean that you have to attend every one, but I'm committing to making sure that we make the liaisons and the subcommittee members who have reports. John is a great example. Health Insurance Trust is not the most exciting committee, but he gives us an extraordinarily thorough update at every meeting. And I think that that's important because it's not something that's particularly, you know, mind-blowingly interesting to me, but it does affect all of our, you know, employees, and it's really important, and it's important work that somebody needs to do. So that's what I'm going to say about it. I would like for people to kind of take another look at the list of things and think about what their responsibilities look like this year, and what, if they have questions around the commitment affiliated with different groups. I know as a new member or a new-ish member, it can be really, really overwhelming to jump into something that you have no idea what it's about. But the thing that I've noticed is that we have a relatively green committee. I mean, you know, I served as chair before I was even done with my first term, and I don't think that that's because I'm some extraordinary leader. It was because Boxborough didn't have a really senior member. I was the senior member, which, you know, that's not saying a lot when I'd only been on the committee for 2 years. So we have a really green committee all around, so it's a great opportunity for us to really do some learning about things that we might already know a little bit about and things that we know nothing about, to sort of round out our knowledge so that we can grow our leadership abilities. Did you want to add anything to that, Diane?
The liaisonships are a really, really important and easy way to kind of get up to speed on committee work. It doesn't sound like that, but you know, we don't work in a silo. You know, we're 2/3 of a town budget in Acton, and their decision-making impacts us, and our decision-making impacts them. And so just going to their meetings and just soaking in what are the issues that they care about, what are they talking about, it just makes the learning curve a lot less steep. So, and it is a way to connect. I mean, who knows? Look, you might go to the supermarket and run into people who know you're on school committee, but the people who need to know that, you know, there's a presence, that school committee it cares about what, you know, the FinComs are doing and thinking and saying, and the boards of selectmen and the CPAC and Minuteman Tech and all that, you know, just if you have an interest in any one of those things, it's a great way, and low impact way. It's less impact than policy and budget in terms of the time commitment. And with remote, it's easy to tune in these days. I really highly recommend just considering pairing up with somebody, because then you could, you know, you could just, you know, trade off. You do twice a month and the person does twice a month. So that makes things a lot easier too. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. John, did you have something that you want to add?
Yeah, because, you know, I always want to throw in some wild card. I'll say that one of the things that's not on here, but actually would be interesting this year, is the Board of Health. The Board of Health is going to be, you know, talking about things and doing things that are interesting. So as something that people could consider saying, hey, you know, I'd like to add that to the list, we could do that. And that's sort of my entree into this year is going to be difficult for connections, you know, in lots of dimensions, but it will be particularly difficult for school committee members who would normally have relied on casual interactions that they would have had around the schools, because we're not going to have that same kind of interaction, which means it's going to be more important than ever for school committee members to find ways to connect with the larger community. So in this year in particular, you know, being able to find, you know, that group that you're comfortable, you know, making some more connections with, you know, is super important. I will now express my personal disappointment when Tessa let me know that Adam wasn't interested in, you know, leading the charge in the capital subcommittee again this year. If that's true, you know, I did offer to Tessa that I would be willing to do that, but you'll see that, you know, I'll be all alone if somebody doesn't raise their hand, you know, and come and join me. So the last thing that I'll say is the school committee is dangerous when the school committee is all alone in the room by itself. One way that we can try not to be in that position is to make sure that people do have those extensive conversations outside of these meetings, so that even if people, you know, aren't zooming in to see us, we know what they're thinking and what they care about.
Thank you, John. All right, so with that, all I'm going to ask of you is to just kind of send me a note if you reconsider any of the things. I mean, the way our policy is written is that the placement of people on subcommittees and liaisons is at my discretion, but obviously I would not like 10 unhappy people working on my committee. So I would like to know if there's other things that you might consider, and I would just encourage you to, you know, take a leap of faith and maybe try something that is uncomfortable, or you didn't think would interest you, or you just absolutely know nothing about. So I'm happy to answer questions offline about time commitments and things that might go with that. So That's all I'm going to say about that. I have nothing to give you tonight for that, although I am going to say that I know that Peter and Marie are eager to get the policy subcommittee and the budget subcommittee together again, so like within the next 24 hours. If you could send me something so that I can kind of put together those committees and those subcommittees. Yeah, did you have a question, Jenny? No, sorry. And Beth, is it okay if I just, once I've made it, if I send it out to the committee, it won't be a discussion item, it'll just be like, this is what I decided. Okay. Okay, so is there a school committee building update? That's next.
Yep, Peter asked me to give it. It'll be quick. Things are moving along with the building project. The Board of Health last week talked about the project, went forward and approved and gave us a permit for the septic system. So that is moving forward, and we're grateful for that. And the modulars are beginning to be installed next week and should be ready to go for school. And that's about it.
Warrants are going to be voted at the next meeting, so I don't think we have to do that. Is there anything FYI that you want to share? No? Do we need a meeting next Thursday night?
What's that?
Do we need a meeting next Thursday night? It's on the calendar already, but we haven't decided.
Our primary goal next Thursday was actually an FY20 budget update.
Okay.
So we could probably wait. Sorry, I apologize. I was further away from the mic. One of our primary goals next meeting was really an FY20 budget update. We had also held that in case we needed to do more work on the plan. I do anticipate as we get closer to the school year, we are going to need to approve the high school handbook. But one of the reasons we intentionally delayed that was because we needed to get through the planning process for our, transition back to school. So now that that's done, I do anticipate that there's going to be some COVID-related, policies that we may need adapted or temporarily waived just because of that. So now that we know what we're doing and what we're planning for, we can really dig into those policies over the next couple of weeks. So I don't know as though we need the meeting next week, but the one after that will be important.
Which is on the 27th?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to tell you that I'm gone the 15th to the 22nd, so you can't change your mind that you need one like that next week. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I wanted to.
Okay. Diane?
Yes.
Yes. Angie?
Yes.
Jenny?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Evelyn? John?
Yes, Peter, put on your mask.
I know.
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Your phone didn't die, woohoo! And me, yes, all right. We'll see you guys on August 27th. Yep.
You read my mind. All of a sudden I went, why am I so comfortable? I'm not supposed to be that comfortable. And I went, oh.